They're almost all fucking stupid. What the fuck does incisive mean? Your incisors are fucking teeth. They cut things. Like how is a DAC incisive? What are you doing? Are you cutting someone to pieces with your goddamn shit DAC amp stack or something? How is it incisive? That makes no sense at all. In order to first explain, we need to talk about the basics. So an audiophile is one who loves audio, one who enjoys audio, and it often comes to itself mean one who cares and puts a very high weighting on the sound quality above just about any and all else. And it doesn't mean just a music lover, because it means also someone that, in the way that it's used in the community, it means someone that also loves trying to get the best gear to represent their music as well, and how those things sound. Because you have tons of people that are perfectly happy listening to AirPods, which sound like garbage. They have nothing underneath 100 hertz. They fall off a cliff. And they'll dance while walking down the street listening to music. So those are music lovers too. So an audiophile, for this purpose in this community, is an individual that also loves about trying to get the best sound quality possible from their purchases. And there is a pretty strong divide in the audiophile community. And it's the divide between subjectivists and objectivists. So objectivism means that things are objective. Your perspective, your point of view does not matter. I'm being very reductive here and skipping over some, like, I want to go on tangents about philosophy and shit because I'm kind of inebriated, but I'm not going to do that. So an objectivist means that there is an objective perspective for everything, an explanation for what is going on, and that we can make value statements, opinions, and decisions and actions based upon those objective ideals and information. So an example of this within the audio community would be, for example, how well a digital audio converter, something that converts audio from ones and zeros to electrical signals that are needed, headphones, speakers, etc. How low is the noise floor for that? What is the signal to noise and distortion ratio? How clean is that signal? And is just the music coming through? This is one thing that tends to be a stickler. But before I go too deep into that stickler, the main thing I want to talk about is what these terms mean. Because on the other hand, you would have a subjectivist. And a subjectivist is an individual that believes that the objective data does not matter. And it is their experience. Well, it sounds good, man, and therefore I like it. Where we would know that this is really an inaccurate headphone. You know, like this is a way overcompensating for the fact that it's not hitting the whole body. And it's just like you have terrible bits here that cause masking, which means you can't hear other parts as well. So it's actually making it less accurate and less good. But the person's like, well, I like it and it sounds good. And what matters to me is that it sounds good. Both of these are really straw men, because you can't discuss subjectivism and objectivism within the audio community and within most enthusiast or hobby communities without creating a straw man of those positions, without slightly misrepresenting them, or doing so by leaning on the heaviest cases of that, most extreme towards that spectrum, because it is that. It is not really a divide, it is a spectrum. On one hand, you have subjectivism, and one hand, you have objectivism. And it can be a slider, anywhere from 100% objectivism to 100% subjectivism. So that's an important thing to be aware of. Are there any terms? It's one of the best examples because of the objectivist divide. Because there are those who believe that the best something measures, which is the when things are below what is deemed as an inaudible threshold, then it doesn't matter. And you want things to measure like that. And there are subjectivists that don't care about the numbers and how things measure. They believe it just sounds better. What are these things that I'm talking about? Those are DACs, a digital analog converter, and then an amp. So it takes that signal that you converted from ones and zeros to an electric signal and makes it louder. So it can properly move the drivers in your headphone, IEM, or speaker. Debate on that. So an objectivist will say, so Mr. or Miss Subjectivist, when you were testing these two DACs, things that convert zeros and ones to electrical signals, and amps, zeros to ones to electrical signals, to louder electrical signals, do you ever volume match these? Meaning that we test to make sure that we use a multimeter to look at the current and the resistance and such in order to make sure that these are getting the same amount of power and producing the same amount of volume. And that's very important because something just being slightly louder can make it observed as more pleasing because we have monkey brain, and monkey brain like loud things, just like monkey brain like sweet things. It's how it works. And then they will just discredit everything that a subjectivist says. And a subjectivist might say that, oh, I don't really care how it measures. I just care how it sounds. So how do you even do a discussion of these things without talking about a whole lot of like basic stuff? Like this feels like it should be a series. Or am I trying to talk about too much?
I mean,
if you want to make it a series, I wouldn't mind.
So simple answer is Kirka's take on DACs and amps. Who gives a fuck? Like, no, who cares? Honestly, there is one indisputable thing, and it is that the vast majority of what's going to determine the sound quality of something is the thing itself. It's the thing that's moving the air. It's the speaker. It's the headphone. It's the IEM. It is always going to be the prime determining factor on it. So my answer to DAC amps is who gives a shit? Because if you're trying to listen to a bunch of different ones to see which one sounds the best, you're typically spending a lot of money. And if you're at that point, like, do whatever feeds your brain dopamine. I mean, we know that just something looking better can make someone think that it sounds better. We know that something looking more expensive can make it sounds better. We know that having taken a hand in building something yourself can make it sound better or be more pleasing. We know that also when people try something new, they tend to be hypercritical. So they'll be like, oh, I've never heard that before. That's so interesting. Well, it's because they're focusing. And they're not normally focusing and giving all of their attention to that thing and checking for those things, because there are so many parameters that we're listening for. We're listening for frequency response. We're listening for soundstage. We're listening for how certain elements come across the size of things. We're listening for these things. And when we listen for these things, we get very hypercritical, and we might think that something's amazing or doing something different, and it's not at all. And then if it has been volume matched and you hear a difference, that's awesome. Buy it. If you have already spent all your money that you want to on getting the best possible transducer possible, and you have just money lying around and it makes you happy, buy it. Who gives a fuck? It doesn't matter if it's 30, if it's minus 30 dB sign ad or minus 127 dB sign ad. It really doesn't matter. But let's talk about the primary facts about them that do typically make a difference and that we can account for and measure. Because I feel like I can't make this video without talking about the objective things that we normally look at. The filter of the DAC. So there's this thing that happens that is at a certain frequency. When it's cutting off ones and zeros, we can make a perfectly accurate representation of our audio using those ones and zeros. But the requirement is that we have to have a sample rate that is double of the region we want 100% accuracy on. This is called the Nyquist frequency and the Nyquist theorem. So we have 44,100 hertz bandwidth. That means that we can capture from 0 on the frequency response, or 1, to 22,050. So the DAC has to do something with that data that's above there. So it has a filter that rolls off those frequencies. So you have a complete representation and there are no errors. And I'm being a little bit reductivist. I'm simplifying things slightly. And there are different types. There's a slow roll off to that 22,000. There's a hard brick wall roll off to that 22,000. And we can look at measurements and see that different DACs, when you put something in, the thing that comes out is modified. We can put a sine wave in and the thing that comes out is modified. So maybe the filter is making a difference. Maybe it's actually been noted that a lot of things that have been subjectively preferred actually do have a frequency response effect. They actually roll off in the top end of the spectrum. What's your impedance, your output impedance? So there's this pretty basic rule, which is that the output impedance of your source, your amp, needs to be 1/8 of the impedance of your headphones. So if I had some IEMs that were 32 ohms in their impedance, then I would want to have something that is 4 output impedance or better. And what that does is we know that if a transducer has a nonlinear impedance curve, we know that it draws more current based on the impedance. So what will happen is the output impedance will have what I like to call a mismatch. And in layman's terms, the frequency response changes due to that issue and due to the exact impedance plot of the headphones and due to the exact amount. So 1 divided by 8 is a good rule, but it actually only limits the effective impedance plot of a headphone or IEM. There's still a lot of wiggle room when you have a 1/8 difference. You're really looking for something like a 1/32 difference. Optimally, the output impedance of your source would be 0.0000000001. Do you know that it's doing that? And is it boosting the mid bass like it normally does? Because people typically have a fond response to that. It creates a sense of punch and a sense of more impact. And when there's extra energy in the mid bass, where this impedance spike tends to be on these graphs. So that's the thing to consider. And let's say that we've considered all these things and we're like, these are all non-factor. They're inaudible. Well, are there other things that we haven't considered? I don't know. In general, we know all the parameters there are to consider. If you accept science, if you accept science, we know all the observable parameters of acoustics and the physics of acoustics. We know these things. It's not like there is some special particle that we haven't heard called the audio particle, that you have more of those particles, it sounds better. We know. The science is understood, the mathematics is understood, but are there other domains that we haven't looked at? Maybe crosstalk is one that I've been very interested in. How does crosstalk affect preference? Because we know Earl Getz did some research that demonstrated that certain types and amounts of IMD, intermodulation distortion, are actually preferred by people. And we know from tubes that some people prefer distortion. And we know from the mixing and mastering world that people prefer like certain types of saturation, like the beautiful tape saturation from an old school tape deck. So one of the things that I've wondered is, we think we have a general rule for where crosstalk is inaudible, but what if crosstalk is preferable in certain regions or amounts? I don't know. What if there is some odd admixture of these elements that when you put them together create preference? Because what we're ultimately looking for is sound quality, and sound quality is the subjective perception of performance. So, do we know everything? In terms of, do we know what's measurable? In the terms of how objectivists can often make fun of subjectivists as magic believers, there's no information that we need more of. We need more possibly of understanding that information. That's the same holds true with frequency response, in that we generally know what people prefer on average, but we don't know how some small deviations in different places of the whole frequency response can impact certain perceptions. What creates the sense, the perception of soundstage? We know it's frequency response. We know that. But we don't know exactly how to say, oh, we have this graph. We can predict from this that the average audiophile would be able to describe this soundstage using the following 10 flowery terms. No, we don't have that. We do have, obviously, that open backs typically have a weaker perceived center because everything is hard panned to the left and the right, and it's open. We do know that IEMs and closed backs tend to have a stronger center. We know that. And we know that frequency response is soundstage, but we don't know how to explain every single part of a relationship to that. So let's just jump to this one then. Frequency response and its relation to subjective experience and technicalities. And that can go with the flaws with the Harman target. There are a couple flaws with the Harman target, but I think most people are very misinformed on exactly what it is saying and how much effort and research there has been into it. So I don't want to give a history of Harman. The thing is some really smart people did some research and found out, we take the average people, they like this and it sounds good. Why do we have to do that? It's because we kind of had an idea for speakers for a while. But when you put something on somebody's head or in someone's ears, it's now bypassing a large part of things that affect the frequency response we hear at the eardrum. So we had to compensate for that. So the best way to compensate for that, what equals the best form of a speaker tuning? And there are some issues with that. So the flaws with Harman include the testers were able to choose the bass shelf frequency, so where it started, and they came to an average area for that start and that preference, and they were able to increase it up or down once the study decided on that's misrepresenting. They could move it up and down. The issue is that it only did a certain type of filter. It did a low shelf that's 0.71 Q. So the shape of that bass is pretty reliant or related to the in-room loudspeaker preference target. So I would say at this point that shape of the bass is still pretty arbitrary. And if you look at the shape of the Harman in-room target, if you look at the shape of that, you notice that there is a bump, and it starts around 150 and it goes up here. So where does that set our Q? Right around where it tends to be in Harman. Around 100, 105 is where our Q is, and then it affects into here. So it's obvious that this had an effect on the research. But what if a different shape is preferred? What if instead of having the shelf, like there is in the IEM and in the headphone target, Harman target, what if it's a linear increase instead? And I understand why they wouldn't do that. It's very hard to keep a stable linear increase in that, and this is a good groundwork to go on. Or maybe they don't think that it matters, or maybe there's something that I'm unfamiliar with. That's entirely possible. But that's one flaw. Another flaw is the smoothing. Tool and Olive showed pretty much the importance of how capturing 24 data points, 1/24th scaling, 24 data points per octave is pretty key and much more valuable than 1/3 or 1/6. But when we look at the Harman target itself, the Harman target itself has 1/3 smoothing. And yes, you can entirely say that, well, I mean, we're having to compensate for different people's ears and how they will perceive the sound differently. So there's already going to be a variation there. So just having a good smooth response is the best. And there has been some information that suggests that a smooth response is the best. But we also know that the human, the head-related transfer function is different on different people. We know the average, but we know that it's not very smooth. So one problem is maybe the target lacks adequate granularity. Maybe in that smooth curve of Harman that we see like this, maybe there's actually a little bit of a narrower spike here and a narrower dip here instead of this smooth flow. Maybe that is the case. Maybe that would be closer to a better average target. So that's certainly a flaw. What's another flaw with Harman? It sounds like complete and utter ass on IEMs. And it sounds like complete and utter ass on headphones in terms of soundstage. It has a very triangular soundstage presentation, which makes sense if you're thinking of speakers. But the issue is that speakers, a little bit of the sound from the left speaker goes in the right ear, a little bit of the right goes in the left. Just because we're not as isolated. But with headphones, those sources are completely separated. The Harman sound signature sounds very triangular, which makes things seem middle, a little bit away from you, and then directly to your left and directly to your right. That's not how music is mixed. Music is mixed on speakers, and your soundstage, you don't hear it directly to your left and directly to your right. So to me, the experience is wrong because the shape of it sounds odd. That's why, even though I own more neutralish IEMs, one of the things that I love is a non-neutral IM, the Sony IER-M9, because even though it's not neutral, the soundstage it projects is much more suitable for the form factor than Harman. So there is a flaw with it in that regard. Are there any other flaws? I mean, there's the obvious flaw that we have very little accuracy above 8,000 hertz. There are better couplers that are being made, but also the variability of the head-related transfer function, the human head-related transfer function. It gets a lot more, I don't want to say chaotic, but there's greater variance up in that region as well due to canal length and other external factors, individual factors, I should say. I think that's false with Harman. Frequency response and its relation to subjective experience text. Yeah, it's all in the frequency response. We don't have time domain. It's minimum phase, which people often misunderstand as meaning that it's no phase. It's linear phase. Minimum phase is a signal processing terms, and it means within an acceptable limit, one that is inaudible or one that is negligible. If you want to know more about that, you can just Google it. But there are a lot of flowery terms that are used in audio, and they are things like resolution. How well is something resolving? Makes sense. TVs resolve. Funnily enough, as discussed that in great depth. There is a very interesting thing in that you can take 10,000 people, they can listen to the same transducer, and they can all have the same feeling about its technicalities. So that means that this headphone does something special. Well, maybe you could do the same thing with EQ if you knew exactly what are the relationships that are creating that effect. We know that masking and reducing masking, where certain frequencies make others nearby hard to hear. So if you have too much lower mids, you then have an inaccurate mids because they're being masked and not as audible as they should be. So the goal would be to have as minimal mass. I don't know, man. I'm not sober at all, and I need to go to bed. This relationship is so yeah. It's all in frequency response. It's not. There's not much more to that, and I hate to use that like cop out, but because science. We know what is minimum delay. We know what a minimum delay system is in signal processing terms. We know how all, using the Fourier transform, all the measurements that we can get, like they used to be on inner fidelity, are just different functions of the same thing, represented in a different way. It's all frequency response. But what is the exact relationship? I know some are starting to believe that it's related to air and air frequencies and how much extension there is up there, because that's like one of the great frontiers. We don't know what should be going on around here, and maybe it should be something a little more level. And maybe that creates more technicalities because we're getting something that we would be missing. Planar cope or planar note? Yeah, I mean, it's this fucking simple. It's this fucking simple. You see this wiggly shit, how it's up and down and all over and about. Well, let's take a different headphone. Oh, let's do the HG650. Do you see any of that wiggly shit? No, it starts to break up and really fall apart around here much later. Why does this happen? Why does it do this? We see a similar thing, but in a different region in electrostatics. And this is my best estimate is phase cancellations due to waves bouncing off of the larger physical structures that attach a planar diaphragm than a dynamic diaphragm and the way it propagates sound. So there are larger structures for it to bounce off in odd ways and cause cancellations. That's possible. Hypothesis is baffled diffraction. It could just be the nature of the type of driver, and if we had it and could get it as smooth as this one, people might not say things like planar timbre. Might be the case. Maybe this is why people think that planars are dead sounding, or they don't slam, whatever that means. I don't know what that means. So that's a possible explanation, but the point is that once again, there's a difference between knowing the cause and knowing and the ability to connect and correlate subjective experience to those causes. So yeah, it's everything. Planar cope or no, planar is a type of transducer. A type of transducer, as long as you can minimize any errors that causes that, it should sound the same frequency response wise. But the fact that they tend to be larger drivers, so there's more room for the wavelengths to propagate across the diaphragm and bounce and cause cancellations. Being in antiphase, I don't know. Maybe that's not even the cause. Maybe that's not even the thing. Not 100% certain on that one. But I do know that they take better to EQ. They have better extension. For some reason, on average, so that's a good question. On average, it could be that they have lower distortion. They can handle some extra EQ in the low end without distorting and sounding unpleasant. Another is that maybe the distortion is the same or higher, but the way that's masked by what's going on in the waviness of the treble, maybe there's a relationship there that makes it to where no issues with that distortion are noticed. But the issue is that, let us take, for example, something like the Hyphaman Sundara. So to get this flat, and flat isn't good, but to get this flat, I need at 30 hertz, because we don't care about 20 hertz. This is feeling, not hearing. We need, at 30 hertz, we need on average 4 decibels to get it flat. At 30 hertz, we have 6 decibels to go to get flat with 1K. Here we have, to get flat with the nearby 1K, we have 4. So that's 2 decibels at 30 hertz, which is actually a pretty big difference when close. Because you have to, the more energy there is low, the more the driver has to be able to move in and out. It's excursion. So that might give us some wiggle room before we head into distortion properties. I don't know. But typically, and especially ones like the Odysseys, have a more linear bass. So why is planar coping a ridiculous thing to say? Because I guess you don't like bass then. Because it's very hard to get that in most dynamic driver headphones. So planars enable and allow that for many, so you can get a better, more accurate response. Accurate being...
So you're saying all DD owners are baselets?
No, not at all. I'm saying that they're Well, I mean, I will address that question. I'm saying that we know that mid bass and lower mids compensate because, so let's say I have a bass note that's being played and the fundamental is 50. The overtone, so one octave up, is at 100 hertz. And it tends to be the second loudest after the fundamental frequency is that first overtone. So it's going to be emphasized. So we know that a mid bass and lower mid bump can make up for a lack in sub bass and perception of impact. So there are advantages and disadvantages to each transducer. And to say that planars are bad because they're planar is absolutely farcical. And to say that dynamics are bad because any reason is farcical as well. Objective data is the most important important factor in buying audio products. The most important factor is patience and trying out for yourself, because I mean, we have this kind of circle of confusion built within the audiophile community, which is I want to test headphones. I then test headphones. I pick the one that I like the sound of the most from that batch. Maybe that's because I've grown accustomed to an emphasis in lower mids or the mid bass. And if I heard something that was more accurate, if we can say that there is a more accurate, which we can to some degree, then you're missing out on something. So just because it sounded good to you does not mean that there couldn't be something much, much better, and you have just grown accustomed to something, or you just don't know what better is. So demoing and patience, but yeah, those are the two biggest things. Patience meaning don't just like buy it immediately. Read plenty of reviews from people that lean the same way that you do. They seem to hear things the same way that you do. Go to demo it several times. Know that when you're testing several headphones against each other, you're also not volume matching them. And we already said up here, monkey brain likes louder, which is why sometimes I've made EQ profiles for people and they tell me that they don't like the EQ profile at all. Well, it's because it has a negative 7 decibel preamp on it, so they need to lower the un-EQ'd response by 7 decibels to match at 1 kilohertz. So you have to account for that as well when you're demoing. And it's not going to be like your home environment. And also, once again, the build quality, the look of something can make you enjoy it more. I do want to address infinite scaling. That's fucking bullshit. That's some fucking goddamn bullshit. That's absolutely nonsensical. It's a headphone is not going to magically turn into something else. I mean, if you're doing that, you're
with the best source in the world.
You're not going to give like the HD 6XX 3 blob imaging and make it not be 3 blob imaging by using a different DAC amp unless it massively changes the frequency response or does something to crosstalk that for some reason makes things sound more diffuse, therefore giving you the perception that there's a larger soundstage. But no, running a $200 headphone out of a $10,000 source chain is absolutely ridiculous. And if you do that, you have more money than any goddamn sense. I really don't think there's more to say than that. Yeah, and I addressed this at the beginning because I wanted to, which is that sound quality matters. It doesn't. Music enjoyment is the thing that matters. The issue is that for me that had some studio experience, everything sounded off. So I couldn't enjoy my music because things sounded wrong. It just kept bugging me, like itching at the back of my mind that this isn't right, I'm not hearing things the correct way. So for me, sound quality mattered a whole lot. For someone that doesn't know better, I mean, give them some like pixels or something like that. Pixel Buds. Not Pixel Buds, Galaxy Buds. What am I talking about? Galaxy Buds. Like the Galaxy Buds Plus. Those are fine. But like, I remember seeing this dude just living his best life. Just this big old dude walking down the street. And I can say that because I'm a big old dude. His shirt was a little bit too tight. He was super sweaty. It was obvious that he just come from a long day of work, and he was listening to music, and he was just jamming. He was dancing on the street, singing along. That's what you should be seeking, not like, oh my God, this headphone sounds so good. I'm like, no, then you're not an audiophile. You're an objectophile. You're in love with objects. Stealth, why is it considered good? It's considered good because it's pretty close to the Harmon target. But notice that we have a pretty spurious tone here. We have a large drop off here. So, I mean, it's about as close as we have. Notice that we have a general decline here, which is more akin to Harmon than this average here. And it has a similar but different bass shelf to that. I want to notice a couple things. People will talk about it being lifeless. Notice that the lower mids are sucked out. Notice that it has more sub bass than mid bass, and mid bass gives that punch. Notice that it has a pretty big dip and a roll off here. Notice that you might be used to a lot of headphones have an overemphasis of the presence region, and the high transients, so the initial impact sounds of snares and kicks, tend to fall in this region. So it can make something sound less alive because those initial sounds aren't as loud. I mean, I don't want to just say things and be hot takes, but let's just where's the tonal technical dichotomy thing? Like, here we go. Tonality, sweet. Tonality. Delete the rest of this. This is something that's perceptual and not actual. It doesn't mean that this driver actually gives the attack quicker. It doesn't mean it sustains the note quicker, and it doesn't mean that it takes longer to reset and release. That's not, no. Transducers their speed is determined by the highest frequency they can do. 300 hertz is going to be 300 hertz, and it's going to stop being 300 hertz when the driver stops oscillating 300 times a second. So this is not a factor because we're not in a room that has reflection. This is a non-issue. So any of this is perceptual. And yeah, I've experienced it. I've perceived it, but it's perceptual. That doesn't mean that it's not important, and we shouldn't discuss it because our experiences matter. Our preferences might differ a little bit. Do we like something that sounds fast, something that sounds slow? What does that even mean? I don't know. But yeah, this is a perception thing. This doesn't exist. Distortion. Human beings really can't hear a lot of distortion because it's masked by stuff nearby. When you have a ton of music playing, you normally can't tell it's masked. I need water. Hey, he has the Gedley research, Earl Geddes. Yeah, there's something about the way these cones break up that tends to cause this perception. Another thing that's really important for BAs for plastic timbre is that they're very leak intolerant. So you're going to have a sub bass roll off. So if you EQ the hell of that sub bass, it's still going to roll off. And gives it like a rubbery one note plastic quality. It could be based about the common treble characteristics. I know metallic timbre, for example, like the Focal OG Clear, it's terrible. It also has terrible spike around 10 kilohertz and a lot of that action going on. So it's just characteristics of the frequency response. It's definitely not the distortion of these drivers. Some people find the DCA stealth dead because all the reasons I just listed, because of all the things that we don't know about correlation between different aspects. Maybe this would be fine if this wasn't here. maybe this would be fine if this wasn't here. But with the two of them together, it creates that human perception. We don't know. We can't come to a clear conclusion on that. Was there anything else? Baselets. Baselets don't exist. They just don't. We know the average variance in base preference, and some prefer a little bit more, some a little bit less, but no one likes a roll-off. And if they say they do, that's because they haven't heard something good that's extended. If we ignored this and it just started to roll off here, everyone's going to immediately start to dislike it more. We know that because a large percentage of rating from trained and untrained listener blind testing, a large percentage of the rating on the overall frequency response comes from the low frequency extension. So when you have something that extends all the way down to 40 or so before it starts dropping, that's better than if it started rolling off at 100. Because first off, you're just losing information. You just are. And if you like, I don't have anything else to say on that. I'm just rambling. I need to go to bed. Audio terms, they're almost all fucking stupid. What the fuck does incisive mean? Your incisors are fucking teeth. They cut things. Like, how is a DAC incisive? What are you doing? Are you cutting someone to pieces with your goddamn shit DAC amp stack or something? How is it incisive? That makes no sense at all. Resolving resolution, I mean, that detail is the same thing as that. How detailed it is, which is just masking. How well it matches your HRTF and masking. So that I don't like either. What are other audio terms? I mean, multiple people say the same headphone slams is probably due to some relationship of frequency response in the region, but to me that doesn't really mean much. I hear it and I think mid-bass emphasis. I think presence region emphasis. Like, let's look at the, what is it? What's the name of the company? Do we have measurements here? Speed and timbre. Oh, look at that. A boost in the presence region where the kicks and shit are. Oh, look at that. The mid bass and the lower mid bass where, you know, your kick fundamental is going to be and most of your bass, but not here. So it's going to be less low end and rumble. So this is going to stand out. This is going to stand out and it's going to hit harder. This is even reduced, making this region stand out even more. These relational things that we don't fully understand. I guess that's what slam is. I don't think I've said anything that's that really hot of a take, to be honest. Infinite scaling, get the fuck out of here with that shit.
Yeah, infinite.
I know the infinite is an exaggeration here, but it's absolutely preposterous. Frequency response is the primary determinant, and no matter what variables you tweak elsewhere, you're not going to magically create something without altering frequency response, which you can with EQ already. But soundstage and how it presents, I mean, maybe that's worse crosstalk, so there's actually a little bit of similar to a crossfeed situation. Maybe there's pleasant distortion going on. Maybe it's just a combination of factors that you like better, but it's not going to be night and day. I mean, the difference between a $10,000 chain and an Apple dongle and an Atom amp is not going to be night and day. If they're volume matched, will it make a difference? Yeah, probably, possibly. But it's not going to make a thing what it's not. If you put $10,000 into making a duck some shoes, it's still going to walk like a duck, you feel me? It's still going to walk like a duck. And that's good. But it's not going to make a thing what it's not. If you put $10,000 into making a duck some shoes, it's still going to walk like a duck. You feel me? It's still going to walk like a duck. A logical experience of a thing. What matters at the end of the day is how you perceive it and what you get out of it. And if you're enjoying it, awesome. If you get a thrill from spending $10,000 on chains, awesome. I'm not saying that that's equivalent to magic rocks that are $500 to make your audio sound better. I'm not saying it's that level of magic belief. I'm just saying it's not that big of a deal. But
There we go.
enjoy your music and peace out.